Marcus Webb was 39 years old, and on the Saturday morning his wife climbed into a Rosso Corsa Ferrari 488 Spider outside their Charlotte home. He was standing at his kitchen window in a paint-stained undershirt, watching it happen, with the patience of a man who already knew what it meant and had already decided what to do about it. He recognized the car because he owned it. Not in the way a man owns a car he drives, in the way a man owns something he built without anyone in his life thinking to ask how. The registration was held under the name of a holdings company called Webb Meridian LLC. The insurance was routed through a commercial umbrella policy. The car lived in a climate-controlled unit at a storage facility in Ballantyne under a key fob his wife had never seen. It was one of 4 vehicles in that unit. None of them were hers to know about. What Darius Hollis did not know, the man currently holding open the passenger door with a borrowed confidence that had no idea what it was standing next to, was that the Ferrari wasn't his. It had been borrowed from a dealership called Charlotte European Motor Group, a business whose signage, whose lease, whose certificate of occupancy, and whose majority ownership stake all traced back directly to Marcus Webb. What Simone did not know, his wife of 9 years, his wife who had looked at him this morning over breakfast like he was something she was already in the process of leaving, was that the $11,200 she had moved out of their joint account over the past 4 months had been noted, documented, and cross-referenced against a pattern that stretched back almost 2 years. What neither of them knew was what Marcus had spent the last 6 weeks building. What happened next would cost them both more than the car was worth. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the kitchen window at an angle Marcus had always liked. It hit the tile backsplash he had laid himself the summer before last, a Moroccan fish scale pattern in cream and slate that Simone had chosen from a design magazine and then left him to execute over 3 consecutive weekends while she visited her sister in Atlanta. He had laid every tile by hand. He had mixed the grout himself. He had used a level and a chalk line and the patience his father had given him as the only inheritance worth keeping. His father had died when Marcus was 23. A quiet man who worked 31 years for the same rail freight company and came home every evening smelling of diesel and effort, and never once complained about either. He had told Marcus 2 things so often they had become the architecture of how Marcus thought. A man who knows his numbers controls his outcomes. And don't let them see the whole board. Marcus was a logistics engineer by training. He had spent 8 years at a regional freight operation, learned the structure of supply chains the way a surgeon learns anatomy, from the inside, under pressure, making decisions that cost real money when they were wrong. He had saved quietly, invested carefully, and at 31 had purchased a failing performance auto import business with $240,000 of his own capital. Charlotte European Motor Group now operated 2 showrooms, a restoration workshop, and a storage and concierge service used by clients who preferred that their most valuable vehicles exist in the world without excessive visibility. Annual revenue had crossed $4.7 million the previous fiscal year. Simone knew he ran a car business. She had never asked what that meant in numbers. She was a regional marketing director for a hospitality group, poised, networked, specific about aesthetics. She wore her success with a kind of practiced casualness that Marcus had found attractive when they met at a conference in 2015, and later understood to be a performance for an audience she was always, internally, tracking. She was not unkind in the beginning. She was not calculating in the beginning. Something had shifted around year 5. Quietly, and then comprehensively, the way a road changes under frost. Everything's smooth on the surface, until the weight hits and the crack opens. He had met her at a rooftop event in uptown Charlotte. She had been laughing at something, genuinely, and the laugh was real in a way her later expressions rarely were. He had introduced himself. She had asked what he did. He had said logistics. She had said that sounded important. He had said it kept things moving. It was the most honest conversation they ever had about his work. He poured a second cup of coffee and stood at the window and watched the Ferrari until it turned the corner onto Providence Road and disappeared. He did not feel what she expected him to feel. He felt the specific clarity that comes when a hypothesis you have been testing for months finally produces the data that confirms it. He set down the mug. He walked to his home office. He opened the fireproof document safe behind the built-in bookshelf he had installed himself. She had never once asked what was in it. And he removed a manila folder he had been building since October. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person who would understand exactly what he needed. He had found the first thread in October, not through suspicion, exactly through pattern recognition, which was the habit of his profession. He had been reconciling the household accounts, something he did quarterly, methodically, the way his father had kept a ledger in a green notebook on the kitchen counter, and he noticed a Venmo transfer to a name he did not recognize. $40. Easy to dismiss. He did not dismiss it. He noted it and kept going. By November, he had found 6 more. The amounts varied. The name, D. Hollis, appeared consistently. Between the Venmo transfers and 2 cash withdrawals that corresponded to dates Simone had claimed to be working late, the total was $2,300. Not large. The pattern was the thing. He did not confront her. His father had taught him, when you move too early, you get a lie. When you wait, you get the truth. He waited. By January, the truth had expanded considerably. He had set up a second personal email account and forwarded 3 months of the household Amex statements to it. He had cross-referenced those statements against Simone's shared calendar. She kept a meticulous calendar, which was the oversight of a person who believes they are managing only one audience. Hotel charges in Asheville on a Friday. She claimed to be at a brand summit. A restaurant in South End on a Tuesday, she had said, was a client dinner. He had pulled the Amex merchant category codes. Client dinners at that restaurant ran as event catering minimums. This charge was for 2. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He opened a new folder on his desktop and named it simply, Documentation. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had defined every significant decision of his adult life. He did not download spyware. He did not hire a private investigator. He did not need to. He was a logistics engineer. He understood that systems, if you gave them enough time and asked the right questions, documented themselves. By February, he had a timeline spanning 14 months. 43 discrete entries. $11,200 in transferred or diverted funds, itemized and cross-referenced to the source accounts. A pattern of deliberate, incremental concealment that had the fingerprints of someone who believed the other party was not paying attention. The specific morning everything clarified was a Thursday in March. He had been at the storage facility in Ballantyne doing a quarterly inspection of the inventory. The Ferrari, a 1967 Shelby Cobra restoration project. A client's Lamborghini Urus being detailed ahead of consignment. His operations manager, a man named Carl, who had been with him since year 2 of the business, had mentioned offhand that the 488 had been checked out the previous Saturday for a promotional loan. One of the sales team had arranged it for a prospective client wanting a weekend test experience. Marcus had looked at the checkout log. The prospective client's name was listed as a referral from a contact in the hospitality sector. The contact's last name was Marsh. He knew a Marsh, Darius Hollis's business partner in a small event promotion company. He had driven home in silence. He had sat in the driveway for 4 minutes. Then he had gone inside, put on the paint-stained undershirt he wore for home projects, made coffee, and begun to consider the full shape of what he was looking at. The following Saturday morning, he had positioned himself at the kitchen window at 7:45. At 8:12, a Rosso Corsa Ferrari 488 Spider had pulled up to his curb. He had watched Darius Hollis, who was 34 years old and believed himself to be a man ascending, walk to the passenger door with a borrowed key and a borrowed car and a borrowed life and he had watched his wife walk out of their house in heels at 8 in the morning with the composed expression of a woman who had not considered the architecture of what she was walking away from. He opened a new browser window. He wrote one email. It was addressed to his attorney. The subject line was 4 words: "It's time to move." His attorney's name was Claudette Reeves. She was 56 years old, had spent 12 years as a corporate litigator before transitioning to a boutique practice that handled high net worth asset protection and marital law. And she reviewed Marcus's documentation folder the following Monday morning with the unhurried attention of a woman who had seen a great deal and was rarely surprised by any of it. She turned the last page and set the folder flat on the desk and said, "The asset concealment work on her end is sloppy." She transferred out of the joint account in increments just under the reporting threshold. That's either coached or instinct, and either way it's provable intent. Marcus said he thought so too. She said, "The more interesting question is the car." She looked at him. "He doesn't know what he was driving." "No," Marcus said. "He thinks he borrowed it from a dealership through a connection. He has no idea I own the dealership." Claudette was quiet for a moment in the way of someone running a calculation rather than processing a feeling. Then she said, "That's going to be a remarkable moment when it arrives." She pulled out a legal pad. She said, "Here is what we're going to do, and here is what we're not going to do. We are not filing anything until the financial forensics are complete. We have 14 months documented, but I want a forensic accountant in the joint accounts going back to the beginning of the marriage. If she has been diverting assets for longer than October, we need to know the full number before we anchor to anything." She wrote a name on a notepad and slid it across the desk. A firm called Pinnacle Financial Forensics. She said, "Gerald there will turn this around in 3 weeks. What he finds changes the floor of the settlement conversation." Marcus nodded. He said, "What about Hollis and the car?" Claudette looked at him steadily. She said, "We don't touch that until we're ready to use it. Right now, it's a detail. In the right room, at the right moment, it becomes something else entirely." She paused. Sometimes the most effective piece of information is the one the other side doesn't know you have. His father had said the same thing, differently. Don't let them see the whole board. Marcus drove home through traffic that moved slowly and without incident. He stopped at a light on Independence Boulevard and sat with the engine idling and thought about 14 months. About tile he had laid by hand. About a laugh that had been real once. About the specific mathematics of a decision that had been made somewhere around year 5 and had been in motion ever since. Patient and invisible and entirely underestimated. The light changed. He drove. He had family in the form of his uncle Raymond, who was 68 and had retired from a career as a master electrician and now lived in a tidy house in Gastonia, where he kept a vegetable garden and a workshop full of tools he maintained with a devotion that approached the religious. Marcus had called him the Monday after the Saturday with the Ferrari. Raymond had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was his way, and when Marcus was finished, Raymond had said, "She used what you built to entertain somebody who doesn't know you built it. That's not just disrespect. That's a particular kind of carelessness about a man's work." He had paused. "Your father would have said, 'Let the work speak for itself.' You know what that means." Marcus said he did. Raymond said, "Come by on Sunday." I made a pork shoulder. Pinnacle Financial Forensics delivered their report on a Tuesday. Gerald, who was 61, and communicated exclusively in the tonal register of a man reading a tax code, walked Marcus and Claudette through 27 pages of annotated transaction history and arrived at a total of $38,400 in diverted or concealed assets across 4 years. The earliest transfer was dated 11 months after the wedding. The pattern had started small: grocery budget overages reclassified as household supplies, cashback skimmed from pharmacy runs, and had scaled deliberately as Simone understood that Marcus did not audit the domestic accounts. He had audited them in October. She had been, at that point, operating with a 3.5-year head start. She was building an exit, Claudette said, reading the report summary. This is not impulsive. This is a plan. Gerald said, the most recent 12 months are the most structured. She appears to have accelerated the pace once a decision was made. He turned a page. There is also a personal loan application in her name, submitted in January for $75,000. The stated purpose was home renovation. There are no renovation permits on file for the marital property. Claudette looked at Marcus. She said she was going to use marital funds to finance the loan repayment. Marcus said nothing. He looked at the number on the page, $38,400, and thought about tile and grout and 3 consecutive weekends. He drove home and made dinner, and when Simone came in at 7, he had her plate ready and the kitchen clean. She sat down and told him about her day, and he listened with full attention and asked one follow-up question about a project she had mentioned. And she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had, somewhere along the way, decided that his attentiveness was ordinary rather than chosen. She had no idea. He washed the dishes after. He was done with the performance in both directions. He was ready for what came next. The meeting was held in the offices of a mediation attorney in South Park on a Wednesday morning in April. Simone had requested mediation through her attorney, a man named Fletcher, polished and procedurally precise, as a prelude to what Fletcher had communicated would be a filing seeking an equitable division of the marital estate. Simone's position, as Fletcher had framed it in preliminary correspondence, was that Marcus had been financially controlling throughout the marriage, had withheld the full extent of his business assets from marital disclosure, and that any settlement should account for her lost earning potential during years she had subordinated her career advancement to the marriage. Claudette had read that letter and set it down and said, without expression, how long has she believed that story? Marcus had said, long enough to perform it convincingly. The mediation room was a long table with a window facing north and a credenza along the south wall. Marcus arrived first and sat with his back to the window. Claudette sat to his right. Simone arrived 7 minutes later with Fletcher, who had the energy of a man who believed he was walking into a negotiation he had already won. Simone was composed in a way Marcus had learned to read precisely. The set of her jaw, the placement of her hands, the half-second she spent not looking at him when she sat down. She was managing something. Fletcher opened with a procedural summary. He referenced Marcus's business interests and used the word undisclosed twice. He was building toward a number. Claudette let him finish. Then she said, before we discuss structure, I'd like to place the financial forensics report on the record. She set Gerald's 27 pages on the table. This documents $38,400 in concealed and diverted marital assets over a period beginning 11 months after the wedding and extending to the present day. Fletcher looked at the report. His procedural composure held, but something shifted behind it. Claudette set down the personal loan application next. Then 3 years of annotated Amex statements. Then a property record from the State Business Registry. She said, I'd also like to clarify the question of undisclosed business assets. She produced a certified copy of the Web Meridian LLC operating agreement, the Charlotte European Motor Group business license, and 2 years of audited financial statements. She set them in a neat stack at the center of the table. Mr. Webb's business interests were disclosed accurately at the time of the marriage. The framing in your preliminary correspondence is not supported by the record. She folded her hands. Fletcher was looking at the Amex statements with the focused attention of a man recalibrating. Simone was looking at the business documents. Marcus watched her eyes travel down the LLC operating agreement to the asset schedule. He watched her understand, for the first time in measurable detail, what she had spent 9 years living alongside without asking what it was. Claudette said, there is one additional item. She removed a single printed page from the folder. It was a screenshot, a photograph taken from Charlotte European Motor Group's checkout log of the loan record for one vehicle. a 2020 Ferrari 488 Spider, registered under Web Meridian LLC. The loan record listed the borrowing contact, the date, and the stated purpose. She said it in front of Fletcher. She said, "The vehicle your client's companion was driving on the morning of March 22nd belongs to Mr. Webb's company. Mr. Webb owns the company from which the loan was arranged." The borrowing contact was connected to Mr. Hollis through a mutual business associate who was, at the time of the loan arrangement, unaware of the full ownership structure. She paused one beat. "We raise it not to embarrass anyone, but to complete the picture of the marital estate that is relevant to this proceeding." The room was very quiet. Marcus looked at Simone. Her composure had not broken exactly. It had become something else. The specific stillness of a person processing a reversal they had not prepared for. She was a woman who managed perception carefully and professionally, and she had managed the perception of this marriage with the same professional care. She had looked at Marcus and seen the undershirt and the tile work and the used truck in the driveway and the modest joint account. She had not asked what else there was. She asked now. He could see it happening in her face, the question arriving 4 years and 4 months too late. Fletcher said something about the need to revisit his client's position. Claudette said, "We're happy to wait." Marcus did not say anything. He had said what he came to say by sitting in that room with those documents on the table. He had built the case the way he built everything, from the foundation, one documented layer at a time, patient and precise, never showing the whole board until the moment when showing it was the entire point. He looked at the table rather than at his wife. He thought about his father's ledger on the kitchen counter. He thought about 31 years of coming home, smelling of diesel and effort without complaint. He said quietly, to no one in particular, "My father told me that a man who knows his numbers controls his outcomes." He stood up. He straightened his jacket. "I've always known my numbers." He picked up his copy of the documents, shook Claudette's hand, and walked out. The morning was warm. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside the office building and let the sun come down on his face and just stayed there, briefly, before he put on his sunglasses and walked to his truck. 10 months had passed like water when Marcus stood in his new workshop in Mint Hill, sanding the second coat of primer off a 1969 Mustang Mach-1 he'd been restoring for himself, not for inventory. Just for the specific pleasure of working on something that had no deadline and answered to no one. The workshop was the best room in the new house. Sealed concrete floor. Industrial pendant lighting over each bay. Built-ins he had designed himself. Claudette had secured a settlement that reflected the full marital estate, Web Meridian LLC, the showrooms, the storage facility, all of it properly valuated. The $38,400 in documented concealment was offset against Simone's share. The final number in Marcus's favor was $312,000. Fletcher had not argued aggressively. There was not much architecture left to argue from. Simone had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Ballantyne. Her role at the hospitality group had been eliminated in May when a regional merger compressed the marketing leadership tier. She was now directing events at a smaller property management firm in Concord. Marcus heard this through a mutual acquaintance, noted it, and moved on. Darius Hollis had learned, in the way news travels through a professional network, that the car he had borrowed to impress a woman belonged to her husband's company. Carl had confirmed the ownership when Hollis called the showroom. That was the last Marcus heard of it. He had met a woman named Denise in January, introduced by Raymond, who had made the introduction with the economy of a man who had decided it was necessary and trusted Marcus to handle the rest. She was 41, worked in commercial architecture, asked questions that went somewhere, and had looked at the Mustang on her first visit and said, "What year?" rather than why. That was enough to know she was worth knowing. He set down the sanding block and looked at the Mach-1 in the afternoon light. The original Acapulco blue would come back with 2 more coats and the right primer. He could see it now under the surface, what it had been and what it would be again when the work was finished. You had to know how to look for it. His father had known how to look for it, and had left behind a son who understood that real power operated in quiet rooms and the work itself was the argument. Marcus picked up the sanding block. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.